Great, thanks. Well, welcome everyone to this workshop on best practices for business resilience and innovation funds. My name is Steve Frisch. I'm the president and CEO of the Sierra Business Council. Our home office is in Truckee, California. We are a triple bottom line organization focused on implementing project work to catalyze long-term sustainable development in the Sierra Nevada region. I want to take just a minute to do a little bit of housekeeping and then begin introducing our guests today. So first and foremost, we would like this to be as interactive a session as it can be. So to facilitate that, you can either unmute yourself to ask a question or raise your hand, and we'll be tracking that in the side. You can also write questions into the chat box, and we'll be attempting to group those questions together so we can answer as many of them as possible. The session format today is that each panelist will have roughly 6 to 8 minutes to do a presentation. Then we can take 2 or 3 questions after that. And we are hoping to save about 30 minutes for questions at the end of the session. And a special thanks to California Forward, to the California Economic Summit, and the California Stewardship Network for putting this session and this day together. It's incredibly important that we're having a rich dialogue across the state about regions recovering together. So thank you all for being here today. As I said, my name is Steve Frisch. I'm the president of the Sierra Business Council. And we are members of the California Stewardship Network and have enjoyed a long collaboration with California Forward around these issues of promoting triple bottom line economic development in California, doing it from kind of a perspective of steward leadership. Our organization focuses on business innovation, climate and energy, regional advocacy, and implementing projects as models across the Sierra Nevada region. We also manage the Northeastern California Small Business Development Center and a variety of different economic development efforts in a largely rural region of the state of California. And for that reason, this idea that we need to be looking at regional economic recovery and development strategies that are grounded in the economies of the region, that are cognizant of the needs to increase and improve equity in the region for everyone living there, and that often are going to require strategies that are localized in their kind of focus and implementation, and that many of those strategies are going to be similar to other strategies across the state of California, and that the best thing this network can do is facilitating learning across all of these diverse regions about what each other are doing and how we can actually replicate those models in other areas of the state of California. One of the things that we have noticed in the COVID crisis and the ensuing economic downturn is that there's a real need for looking at new financial tools to facilitate recovery, both grant funding for small businesses and nonprofit organizations, and new lending instruments, particularly in regions that have not had the benefit of micro enterprise funds and similar small scale community-based lending instruments. So the origin of this workshop really was a rather rich discussion we had at California Forward and the California Stewardship Network about the point that there were some remarkable practitioners across the state working on this very issue, and that there were differences in how regions were approaching this. But there were also a lot of similarities around best practices and essentially how these new funds could be used to prompt, to speed recovery, and to improve equity in our local economies. So we have some very interesting and exciting guests today, and roughly 4 or 5 of them. and then we'll have an open session for questions at the end as well. So first, I'd like to introduce Isabel Guzman, who is the director of the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. Isabel previously served in the Obama administration as the Deputy Chief of Staff at the Small Business Administration, where she oversaw policy across all program areas, including capital access, counseling, disaster assistance, contracting, international trade, and innovation. And Isabel is a resident of California, but her family moved from Texas. We really like reversing that California to Texas thing to the Texas to California thing, following a family dream to launch a business. And her formative years, her early years were spent working in her dad's chain of veterinary hospitals. So welcome, Isabel. We're really anxious to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me join and for the opportunity to sort of set the stage for, the state that we were in as we embarked on some of this innovative thinking around capital for small businesses. I do relish this role and this opportunity probably because of my formative years of being with my dad, who's a small business owner, which prompted me to have my own firms as well and launch different businesses throughout my career, as well as working with startups. And finally in government. And I returned to government again under Governor Newsom, just really with the calling to his vision of a California for all, and really a focus on inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems, which for me meant that your race or your gender or your zip code should not determine your success path. And so I think that's so I appreciate being here, and just so you know that about me, that's my passion, that's why I'm here. One of the things that I wanted to do is sort of set the framework of what we were walking into. The facts are, of course, we know that small businesses are critical to our economy. The 4.1 million businesses in the state, do employ nearly half of our private workforce. And so really critical. And yet we saw that, based on some studies that were coming out, JP Morgan Chase Institute research, nearly half of them only have 15 days of cash flow. So we knew as soon as, COVID pandemic hit and there were these expected closures of non-essential businesses, that was going to be devastating for a lot of the smalls. And I think that's really what set the framework for everyone hustling to try to ensure that risk of closure was diminished. Clearly we could not afford to lose half of them in 15 days if they could not survive. And so that's why I think you saw early on the federal attempts to center on workforce, really trying to help businesses retain all the employees that they have in both statewide and nationwide, keeping that 50% mark. We also knew, though, going into this, that underserved communities, especially diverse, Black and Brown founders, women, immigrants, were in highly precarious situations. It's a population that has, historically been shut out of, wealth creation, education, et cetera, but also in the small business realm, we're just not achieving the type of job creation or revenue generation due to some challenges in access to capital, especially. And so, going into it, we knew that this was an at-risk population, that any progress they had been making, because since the Great Recession, so many of these businesses were launching, women and minorities were leading on small business creation and in terms of the rates of small business starts. And so you knew that we were trying to slim this gap, this opportunity gap and this equity gap and a gap for small businesses, yet they were still the most at risk. And so that's the framework that sort of raised all these alarms, and I think also created an opportunity for new players to come into this space of small business and micro lending, for really to pay attention to the massive community impact that small business deterioration was going to have, and be as innovative as possible, as quickly as possible, to preserve any equity that gains that we were making in terms of creating these diverse founders, as well as just supporting small businesses broadly who employ so much of our workforce. And so, I think that walking into that, early on, my colleague Kathleen Kelly-Janis, who's the governor's senior advisor on social innovation, and I got together briefly to try to reach out to philanthropy, to engage them in this conversation. I had done so earlier at the SBA in 2014, and there wasn't as much of an appetite, but I will say that I was pleasantly pleased that you saw so many private high net worth individuals, but also philanthropy, corporate social responsibility, not the usual players of CRA type of corporate giving. And you found everybody really realizing that this was critical, that we look at microlending and support for small businesses and grants. And so a lot of the conversations that we had early on were just trying to rush funding in to support the CDFI network, who we knew needed liquidity, as well as other mission-based lenders, and trying to prop up the needed cash flow for this huge task at hand of trying to keep these businesses afloat with such limited cash flow. So I say all that just to say that I was so impressed and thankful at the role that philanthropy has played in this, in the development of strategies around small business lending, and I think you'll see it, materialized in some of the organizations that are going to present what they've done regionally to respond, to this crisis for small businesses. But with those philanthropic grants, you were able to create more flexibility in your loans, or maybe give some grants or 0% interest, and so it allowed for lenders to be more creative and supportive of small businesses. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that wrapped around all this is this constant recognition that you need to ensure that that the small businesses also have a full suite of services to help prop them up. Funders were recognizing that things were not going to easily go back to normal, that businesses had to change, had to pivot in order to survive and be able to maintain future loan payments, even if they were deferred for 6 months. And so you really started to see more engagement as well from our technical assistance providers. We support a network of 86 centers across the state that are federally funded centers. They also received additional funding under CARES Act, as well as ongoing state support. But you saw them really stepping into providing those layers, wraparound services that could help small businesses succeed and pivot. We know that like a third of the business said they would have closed if they had not created engagement online. If they hadn't adopted those digital tools to allow them to sell online. Over half of them had increased online interactions, and 3/4 of them started using digital tools, which is really impressive in terms of historically where small businesses have been in terms of technology. So to see that adoption, recognizing that a loan has to come with technical assistance as always, but even more targeted towards pivoting and coming up with strategy that will allow you to succeed in this marketplace. And so I was happy to see that the state also, through Governor Newsom, early on launched $50 million in some of the CARES Act funding to support the Small Business Finance Center with disaster relief loan guarantee program, so that this would be established and ready for those who did not qualify or do not qualify for PPP lending at the federal level, or the economic injury disaster loans at the federal level, for them to be able to step in to a program that has a 95% guarantee that CDFIs and other lenders can build up a strong portfolio of loans in order to support the small businesses who need it the most. And so, I know that today we're going to hear about some really innovative regional strategies, and we have, from a long time perspective, seen that the regional approaches, understanding what the nuances are, who the providers are on the ground, is so critical. Making sure that businesses are able to access innovative programs that can be wrapped around with great services. So I'm really excited to hear more from the panelists today and then participate in the conversation. But so thank you all for joining us.
Steve, sorry, you want?
Just want to remind people, if they want to ask questions at the end of each one, use the chat box, please, to ask questions. But while we're waiting for the flood of questions to come in for Isabel, we will move on to our next presenter, who is Carolina Martinez from CAMEO, or the California Association of Micro Enterprise Opportunity. And I have to say that CAMEO is an organization that we've looked to for inspiration within our own organization. Carolina has 13 years of experience working in economic development and business consulting. Her vision has really been defined by the variety of experiences she's had with nonprofits and universities in South and North America. CAMEO is California's premier kind of micro enterprise and micro business platform. So it's a great resources for all of you in your communities. And she's also the mother of an 11-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl who want to take over the world. And I think that we can't wait for that.
Me neither.
I think it's time. So Carolina, welcome.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you everybody for the invitation to participate in this panel. Such an honor to be with all the other panelists here. So I thought we could get started with a brief overview about CAMEO, and then we can dive a little bit more into our experiences with our members. And I think the next slide gives you. Could you move to the next slide? Okay. Well, I'll just I wanted just to introduce CAMEO to everybody. I'm not sure if everybody's aware of who we are. We're a statewide network of over almost 300 organizations throughout the state that are providing business consulting in capital to micro and small businesses. A lot of the federally funded organizations like SBDCs and WBCs are part of our network, as well as all the small business lenders in the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce and independent nonprofits. And basically what we focus are on those 4 pillars that you are seeing on the screen. We do a lot of advocacy on behalf of our members and the small businesses to advocate for resources for them. We've become a CDFI incubator, so we definitely focus to support and nurture different lending programs to build the right infrastructure to scale lending throughout the state. We do have our CAMEO Academy to build the capacity of our members, and definitely we foster ecosystems around the state. We have regional and statewide networks that we like to really promote, and it is really important for us to really convene and build those thriving ecosystems of support for the entrepreneurs. And I think when we are talking about regions rising together, this becomes a new challenge and a new purpose for what we're doing, because we definitely feel like we cannot support the entrepreneurs alone, and just coming together to really build those ecosystems and those networks is really important to build the capacity of our small businesses, and especially during this COVID-19 time crisis. So this is what we've been doing for 25 years. And when COVID-19 hit and we started realizing how much we've been affected and how much small businesses were going to be affected, our main concern was really to how we could provide value to our members to provide the right resources to the entrepreneurs. And so we kind of went into a frantic search of all the relief programs and how we could filter them, and we could do triage to help our consultants and members to really understand better all these programs. We were providing around 3 webinars a week, and we actually, for the first time, were serving as small businesses, just because a lot of consultants decided to just share the information directly with the small businesses to simplify the process. So what we are seeing right now is obviously how we could continue providing those valuable resources for our members and the small businesses. But it is interesting because part of what we were seeing before, it's still valid, just in a rapidly scale. So everything kind of speed up, and now we are trying to catch up with everything that we were working on previously. So I wanted for today just to focus a little bit more about the micro lending. We are seeing a lot of the small businesses trying to really, with a big need of capital for them to survive. And we are talking about our micro lenders, how they need more capital to be able to deploy more of these funds. So I wanted to show you a little bit about what we were seeing before in the CDFI landscape. And this goes until 2016, but it's very similar in 2017 and 18. And this is interesting because we were seeing in micro lending very low numbers. And we were seeing about $50 million in microloans defined by $50,000 or less. We were seeing amounts of 3,600 or 4,000 loans made a year for these microloans. And that was something that definitely was not the need of the small businesses throughout the state. We're talking about 4 million small businesses in California with capital needs like at least 99% higher than this. So we definitely need a lot of more capital input in there. What we are seeing with this crisis this year has been like the light has been shown into the needs of these small businesses. So we are really showcasing that these numbers cannot continue. We have to really include more capital. We need to deploy more funding to support our the organizations. Some of the challenges that we have seen in the micro lending has always been that it's very labor intensive. And what we heard from a lot of our lenders is that it is obviously as expensive to deploy a $3,000 loan than a $100,000 or $250,000 loan. So obviously that is a big challenge for them to continue. There is a lot of manual systems that are still that are very time consuming and that don't allow them to kind of streamline their process. And the underwriting is something that is a big concern for all of us, as it can be very inconsistent and again in a manual environment. And we see the lenders with different softwares that are being used that really not allow them to integrate the process. So we do see a lot of struggle to scale. So we do what we've done from CAMEO really is how taking care of these challenges, how can we really support them in the next scale, and how could we help them really scale up and provide more capital to the small businesses. So for our COVID-19 focus, after kind of going with the relief funds, we took some time to assess what we currently had, what our strengths were, and how we could support our network and the industry as a whole with what we currently had. And we realized that the majority of the programs that we were deploying were actually applicable and very needed at this time. So we decided to focus on three main areas for our members. We wanted to definitely support the technology piece. We had 3 cohorts right now for lenders and for business advising organizations. But we are very conscious that technology right now, as Isabel was saying before, and we had a conversation with the panelists before, is something that the small businesses, even if they were not tech savvy, they were forced to adapt with this crisis. So we needed to really make sure that all the lenders had online lending capabilities. We had started an online lending platform cohort 4 years ago, and we were in the process of launching our second cohort. So we just had to speed up the process and really connect 5 lenders to a platform that we are hosting, where they can build the loans from the origination to the portfolio management and servicing. So this is really going to allow them to deploy funds quicker, faster, and really being able to scale up to provide so much needed funds right now for the small businesses that are suffering. And at the same time, we built 2 other cohorts for the technical assistance, moving all our members to the moving our members online and making sure that we were able to provide seminars, consulting, trainings online, and they were able to reach out to them directly was a priority. So that was also deployed and continues to be deployed to build the capacity of the consultants. We also decided to share best practices. And with that, we've had convenience, and we have a collaborative in Los Angeles specifically to share best practices and just to share what the needs are. We have listening sessions every week with CDFIs. We have listening sessions with our members to really share what the challenges are, what the best practices might be. We are talking about underwriting training under the crisis and how to build a lending program, keeping in mind that the crisis is actually affecting the small businesses and will be affecting the underwriting criteria, the underwriting criteria. So we're really kind of refocusing all the programs that we had to really support the members and being conscious that the small businesses really are not at the same level that they were and that they will never be. Like, it's not that we are going to be asking them to come back to what their business was. So even for sharing best practices, we've heard a lot about how we could shift the business model of our entrepreneurs. And that also applies for the nonprofits and the lenders and the organizations that we are providing support. It is a very strong conversation that we've had, and we definitely want to continue deploying those strategic questions to shift the model, the business model. And lastly, but not least, obviously, we are very conscious about the need of liquidity. So we are currently and will continue to look for funding to deploy to lenders. We did have the Karin Fund, which is a loan to lenders program. And it was completely deployed during this time. And we're looking to replenish that and increase it to be able to deploy more funds for our, especially for the smaller lenders, to be able to reach out the underserved communities, the rural communities. We do see there is a lot of regions throughout the state that are not getting a lot of the loans and the federal funds. So we're really supporting all the programs that will require some of that capital. We've been also presenting a lot about the state loan guarantee and how the state has deployed some of those funds, just to make sure that the lenders are aware of that, and the small businesses also are aware that those programs can be accessed. And obviously, we're always providing feedback about how we could improve programs and how we could continue deploying that. So it is a lot of efforts right now in terms of continue to deploy and build the capacity of the industry, as we are seeing it throughout the state. Things are changing every day by the minute, sometimes it feels. But we are very happy to be able to partner with our members, with different organizations, philanthropy, and public officials to be able to deploy more of these programs and being able to really reach more organizations. So this is like a super brief overview, but I'll definitely like to stop here and answer any questions you might have or continue hearing from the panelists.
Great, thanks, Carolina. We do have a couple questions. The one from Chase Jarvin at the Tahoe Prosperity Center. If loans have come with technical assistance, what kind of assistance has been the most helpful? And are there any loan conditions that are most likely to promote success of the business, or is absolute flexibility kind of the best recipe for success for these businesses?
Yeah, from our members, I'm guessing the question goes there too, is definitely the majority of the lenders have been implementing a requirement to provide technical assistance. Either themselves have deployed some of the consultants, their own consultants, or have partnered with business advising organizations like SBDCs, WBCs, or independent or nonprofits to provide that. One of the things that they're really looking at is the the viability of the business and their flexibility to really shift business model to respond to the current trends has been something that has been taken really into account for that. So there is a lot of, and it is obviously a big conversation about what businesses might not make it. And I think that is a very hard reality, but it is also a conversation very much needed with the consultants and with the small businesses to be realistic about expectations and about what can be done and what cannot be done.
Also, a question from Allison Schmidt, and one I'm really curious about too, is whether or not you take a regional place-based approach to your ecosystem supports. And I couldn't help but notice that you have a rural initiative, and I'm wondering if there are differences between the different regions of the state that you serve or that you provide service, tech assistance to serve, and what you're seeing about those kind of regional and place-based approach that are successful.
Yeah, absolutely. We do divide the state in 8 regions, and some of them are rural, some of them are obviously urban, but the difference was the needs are completely different. So we've been working with our members in each region to determine how we could support them. Interestingly enough, when we were like in the midst of this and calling all our members to find out how we could help, rural areas were not that affected. So obviously they kind of took a little longer to feel the crisis, but I feel like by now everybody's obviously felt it. So part of it is there is a lot more capital coming to urban areas, and obviously there are more resources available in these regions than in the rural communities. So and one of the challenges also we have in the rural communities is not only we have a lot less resources, but we are also having the issue about accessing online programs and traveling. So that is definitely something that we're working with our members in rural communities to try to provide funds, but also online programs and helping them to build that capacity for their own members.
Kind of a combination question and comment from Craig Sharton that the Community Reinvestment Act really focused their investments in these full scope areas of the state, and these areas are where most of their deposits come from. And that means that inland and other regions of the state that provide affordable housing and economic development and CDFIs, et cetera, aren't receiving the same support from large banks that wealthier coastal cities are. And are there any strategies for addressing that issue, or does the state chartered bank issue play into that, or could it play into that in the future? How do we spread that that capital more equitably across the state?
Yeah, I don't know. That is completely true. That is part of the challenges that we're seeing with less capital in some of the more distant areas. I would say, and I would probably defer to Isabel some about the state, but I would say anyway that we are seeing through this crisis a more interest from foundations and private philanthropy also to come and play a role into the needs of these areas. So that might be a good opportunity for us to also develop more of these partnerships to bring more dollars to rural communities. Definitely we're building like some of the state, as I said, the state loan guarantee program to build it with our members in rural communities is a good opportunity. But and some banks, some of the bigger banks are interested also in providing some support in those communities, but definitely resources are a little bit more scarce on those areas. I agree with you. Great.
Isabel, do you want to address that question?
I'm sure I can chime in as well. I mean, just that, definitely the state guarantee program, with 95% guarantee, does offer a variety of lenders the option of going with the state program to support rural communities. And so it's not just open to the CDFI network either. It is open to multiple lenders through the financial development corporations that exist within iBank. So I do believe that's a really strong option for rural communities to try to leverage philanthropy combined with the state guarantee to create some products that can better serve those communities outside of the CRA network.
Great, thanks, Isabel. Thank you, Carolina. We have another question here, but I'm going to save it for the end and ask all of the panelists this other question. So if you were the person who generated the question about going virtual, I'll circle back around to it. But I want to shift now to our next panelist, Karin Demarest. She's the Vice President of Community Impact for the Community Foundation of Sonoma County. And she joined the Community Foundation in 2011 with about 20 years of experience in the field of youth development and education, and helped launch the Sonoma County Resilience Fund after the devastating fires in Sonoma County in 2017, and has devoted her time since then to disaster philanthropy, supporting long-term recovery for her community. And this is an issue that I think many of us share in forested regions of the state, and there are lessons to be learned from our previous disaster recovery for how we're setting up funds today. So, and a personal note on her, she considers herself lucky to be able to surf. I think that Bruce Stenslie, who's on a little later, considers himself lucky for that too. I love that, that piece of California that we can surf and ski and hike. And so Karin, share your experience with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Steve, and to all of you for this opportunity. I am going to pivot a little bit since we're going to talk about community foundations, but I believe Carolina was really leading up to the value of both looking at the larger CDFI access to innovative funding, and then really looking locally, particularly for rural communities who may not have access to innovative funding, that turning to your community foundation can be a real opportunity, and not just for financing for small business, but because inherently in a community foundation, we're always looking at the intersectionality of all sectors like housing, health, education, the environment, even the arts, so that we're holding this intersectionality as a part of the opportunity for a workforce to thrive. Workforce needs to be supported and is dependent on and needs access to and support with all of these factors. So that's the role that the community foundation can play. So next, I don't know if you have my slides, but we launched the Sonoma County Resilience Fund in 2017, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide as well. After the firestorm in 2017, and you know, when you're talking about community foundation funding, you have to think about how are the funds coming in. In disaster philanthropy, we saw that this image that was flashed across television screens all over the country brought resources into our community, and it was our job to figure out how to expend those resources in a way that would have the greatest possible impact on our community. We raised about $15 million. There was a lot more raised, but a lot of that went to the immediate response. And in disasters, there is this impulse to give money away very quickly. The need is obvious in that moment, but the needs are really long-term, and to stick with it for a long term. And this is a mindset we're putting around COVID-19 as well. What can we do to be there for the long term? We did raise additional funds when we had the other fire in 2019, but with COVID, there's some funding coming in, but it's really different. So what we're looking at now is using what we've learned in disaster philanthropy to support our community. And through the last couple of years, we've created really strong networks with mostly organizations that are providing health and human services. This was the first time that we reached out to the business community. And that was really, really important. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But I think one other reason that you know, we are so aligned with the California Forward mentality and approach is that equity is a through line in all of our grant making. And one of the things that we learn from disaster philanthropy and recovering from a disaster is that there are huge disparities in access to resources. And there was a research paper that came out just after 2017 that showed that our white community members were actually going to financially benefit from the disaster to the tune of about $120,000, whereas our community members and people of color would be looking at a financial loss of between $10,000 and $30,000. So that really stuck with us, and we recognized that we would need to you know, really be clear about how we were expending our funding to address these disparities. And I think this is absolutely true in COVID, and how we recover from this is we have to look at the institutionalized racist policies that could hinder the way that we recover as a community, will hinder unless we're very deliberate about being innovative in terms of our resource deployment. So you can go to the next slide. We had not worked with the business community, and they reached out to us with COVID, and they said, listen, our workforce is going to be devastated by this. So what can we do together? And unlike loans, this was a grant program that was meant to get money out quickly with very little vetting. And I mean, you know, targeted on those organizations that needed it the most. So it was just a up to $2,000 grant. We seeded it with about $50,000, and then that allowed the Santa Rosa Metro Chamber and the CEO, Peter Rumble, to go out and raise additional funding, primarily from financial institutions and large donors. And so small businesses applied, very simple application. It was vetted by the team at the Santa Rosa Metro Chamber, and then checks went out really quickly. And, you know, as we were preparing for this, I thought, you know, what can a business do with $2,000? That's, you know, potentially a fraction of one rental payment. But it was amazing what we heard in terms of what people were doing with this money. And in addition to what they were able to do, it was the communication that it sent to them that we cared about our small business community enough to do something we'd never done before. And it provided a sense of hope at a really bleak moment in time. And so it was very effective. And we got thousands of applications that we were not able to fund. So we'll look at the model again. We're in the process of evaluating, but I think it's a really easy role for a community foundation to play in terms of partnering with small business. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. I think what is really different from a community foundation standpoint is, you know, like I said in the beginning, we do look at the intersectionality. So if our workforce is suffering from the trauma of a disaster, you're going to see impacts in the business community. If our workforce is losing their housing, you're going to see impacts. So we're looking at it from a really holistic viewpoint and funding in that way. Additionally, we're looking at ways to support the small business that isn't just a loan or a grant, but I can give an example. Sonoma Family Meal is an organization that said, okay, we have restaurants closing and we have a huge need for food. So why don't we get a grant to support restaurants to make food that they then distribute to those who are going hungry, particularly in the beginning when families whose kids were being fed 3 meals a day at the school, and those kids were no longer able to have access to that food, and restaurant workers who had no idea when they were going to go back to work. This was a really creative way to have that double bottom line impact. So we at the Community Foundation are looking at both our granting opportunities like around Sonoma Family Meal and also supporting our small business community, and then always looking at how we can support the mental health of our community as we navigate this trauma, because it is a trauma. And we know that from the disasters that we have managed to recover from and become more resilient from, that we need to pay attention to all of these factors. So I think I'll stop there if anyone has any questions.
Great, Karin. I was struck by 3 interesting things in your presentation. One, this responsibility to look at both the short term and the long term, because it is in the long term that the real opportunity to catalyze change occurs. The second was the opportunity to redeploy funds to address historic economic inequality and racial injustice, which is, I think, a really important part of both the grant programs and the micro lending programs. And then an interesting issue that I think we'll also come back around to at the end, the different funds are serving different parts of the community. And I'm going to be curious from everyone about how they're looking at nonprofit organizations versus small businesses in the use of these funds, and might ask that question to everyone at the end. But thank you so much. Really appreciate your presentation. We're going to shift now to Bruce Stenslie, who's the president and CEO of the Economic Development Collaborative, located in Ventura County. He's a member of both the California and Ventura County local workforce development boards. Bruce is also a co-chair of the California Stewardship Network and a longtime friend, and also another organization we look to for inspiration here from the Sierra Nevada. And he says he needs a haircut, but it makes him feel like a hippie, so he's happy. So Bruce, over to you.
Thank you, Steve. It appears you got a haircut and you were my inspiration all along, and now I'm left alone. Sorry, I'm gonna have to follow now. While the camera catches up to me, I can start chatting, or I may be there and just can't see it. Thank you for the invitation. It's a thrill to follow the rest of these panelists. So our organization, Economic Development Collaborative in Ventura County, is a public-private partnership, and thrilled to be a partner in the Stewardship Network because that's really facilitated our ability to move from what was just, I hate the word, but just economic development, but to reach and strive for being more of a steward of a triple bottom line approach to the region's economy. And very specifically looking to promote broadly shared opportunity and prosperity and tolerate nothing less. So that's a reach for us, but it's something important for us to think about. It seems to us, or it seems to me at least, in the chat coming up to this conversation, that what we really wanted to do is talk about how we are sort of investing in alleviating, the immediacy of our misery and transitioning to something that was far more strategic. So on the one hand, I'm going to talk about a program that we've launched or just launching as of today and tomorrow in Ventura County that looks a little bit about the remediation, but I really want to pivot that into talking about how do we move to strategy. Can you flip to the next slide, I think it would be, please? So there you go. So what we're doing in Ventura County is the County of Ventura, oops, there we go, is taking a total of $20 million of its CARES Act money and putting it into 2 programs, and one of which we're helping deliver, this retaining jobs, helping businesses. At least $10 million that might turn to $15 million in 2 rounds of grant funding to businesses, $5 million in each round, $5,000 grants to businesses and nonprofits. And because we anticipate we'll get far more interest in all of that, then we're going to go to a lottery selection. Simultaneously, the county is funding $10 million in rental assistance for low-income residents. Funding, its base shows there on a formula. These are direct payments to landlords. This is just sort of a start, although it's fairly late into this game, of sort of some strategies I hate to use the phrase, but sort of throwing money at the circumstance that we have. Now, when I talk about, can you flip to the next slide too, please? When I talk about this flip from remediating the impacts to moving to more of a contributing to reinvention, we also need to understand that these are not discrete moments, right? These aren't, we go from one phase and all of a sudden there's some magical transition and then we go to the next. Rather, These are sort of fluid moments. They tend to coexist. But our goal and our strategy as we launch this program, that I'll talk a little bit more about on this slide, is that we don't let ourselves get stuck in the notion of what can we do just in remediation, but how do we package that with a more holistic approach, and using the notion just a moment ago, which is fantastic, of course, is the whole idea of what do we do short and long term. And this is clearly, this program here, a shorter term investment that we're using intentionally as a leverage or a platform or a springboard to longer term. What's interesting about this and giving a bunch of grant money away is we are an alternative lender as a regional small business development center. We share that with Steve and are thrilled to be partners with GO-Biz. We're Ventura and Santa Barbara County. We do international trade consulting through Los Angeles, as well as Ventura and Santa Barbara County. As an alternative lender, we partner with PacWest Bank, City National Bank, Mechanics Bank. We have first 5 funds to invest in early child education. We're a lender. The whole idea of going out and saying, let's give money away is sort of a trick for us that we're not really thrilled about, but it's growing on us. The other notion that we came to with this is if we're going to give pots of $5,000 away to 10 million bucks or maybe $15 million worth, this is a ton of transactions. And what we wanted to do initially is try and track the money to the most impacted businesses with the greatest challenges toward reopening, who could document or identify for us how exactly this money would be to their significant benefit and contribute to their reopening. And since we couldn't do that very well because of this volume, and we sort of defaulted to these criteria, hey, you need a business license, you got to tell us you were somehow impacted by COVID-19. In Ventura County, the strategy is all businesses are required to register and sign an attestation at a website held up by the county. VC reopens, makes sure that every business is signing an attestation that they've looked at and incorporated the state guidelines and have actually written a local plan or their own small business plan or business plan for accommodating those guidelines and assuring safety for their workers and their customers. And we're a support partner in doing that. We've targeted this to this gross revenue notion so we can do home-based businesses as well, but not over a couple million. And we're also trying to track this money to folks that didn't get a whole bunch of EIDL or PPP money as well. But where we landed on this, and I skipped over a key piece of this, this isn't really just a government program and an EDC program. This is actually being led and launched by philanthropy, the Ventura County Community Foundation with us, but primarily on their own stead, was the catalyst for figuring out how to move this, partner with other cities and other resources, and make this not a standalone program, but part of a larger rapid response strategy of the Community Foundation and the region, and this is simply one element of that. But where I want to hit this for a moment and then go to the next slide in just a minute and get out of your way, is we but we had complete agreement from the partners, the county, the foundation, our organization and board. But what we want to do is make sure that at least the first quarter of this money that goes out by a lottery goes to women and minority-owned businesses. The next quarter of the money that goes out goes to disadvantaged neighborhoods and communities by some mapping and identify where we can put this money most effectively. And then the rest of the dollars will go out on lottery, somewhat weighted by census population, so each city gets its fair share. That's round 1. Depending on how this goes, maybe rounds 2 and 3 will be more heavily weighted toward minority and women-owned businesses and disadvantaged communities. And that's our goal in going in that direction. But go to the next slide, please. So at least the thought that I wanted to leave you with there is that while we're not able to really target this money as efficiently as we would like in terms of how do you really invest in a business most strategically, and I was very interested in the conversation in the last presenters about how do you really package effectively technical assistance. We're a small business center. We don't want to make loans or make grants without having the capacity to engage. So this will also be an outreach strategy to these businesses. We may get overwhelmed. We're used to that, as Steve will attest. We, as SBDCs, have been overwhelmed, and I'm sure the CAMEO partners and others just overwhelming the community foundations of need and interest to our resources. But finally, this pivoting to renewal. sort of three areas. Number one, what we're really learning and what we've always known is not just that small businesses and businesses that they deal well with disruption of all kinds, social disruption, economic change in customer tastes, but that they do it by innovating, right? And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we're looking at regional and business by business strategy on how do they effectively think about innovating their business models to anticipate changes. The next bullet there is also about this notion of this isn't just about business, this is about land use policy and about public policy writ large. We have massive changes in transportation policy that need to be implemented, assuming that even a small share of us continue to work at home. Broadband infrastructure, which has been mentioned several times. You know, 3 months ago, the discussion was purely about how do you get fiber to business centers and how do you get fiber to anchor institutions, and now it's how do you get fiber to the neighborhoods and to the homes, and how do we think about decentralization strategically. And finally, if we haven't learned anything in this particular disaster, it's that the impact has not been proportionally distributed across all races, all ethnicities, and all socioeconomic strata. This has been purely, almost entirely, at least in our community, and we're looking at regional, statewide, national data, that it's to the industry sectors that pay the lowest wages, have the least resilient workforce, have the most vulnerable populations. And then, sorry to get a little bit political on this, and then we get all torqued out of shape because a lot of these workers, after they're getting the CARES Act benefit and better unemployment insurance benefits, are reluctant to come back to work. Well, maybe we ought to pay them a better fair share of the wage in the first place, and that's not to throw the businesses under the bus. But it's pretty hypocritical when you hear the businesses say, and I've told this to our businesses locally, I'm still employed, we'll see how that works. You can't complain when you're paying somebody minimum wage and there's virtually no loyalty to a very mobile workforce. And then you're upset that they're not coming back to work and happy about doing it. They're not safe, they're not well paid. We've got to figure out how to turn this crisis into a dialogue that is more holistically embraced by all factions, all parties, all players about social equity and upward mobility. That's a little preachy, and I don't know, I don't have the magic trick on how to get there, but the lessons are pretty clear. So we can throw money right now at businesses. We've got to figure out how do we do that in a manner that is also investing in their long-term strategy of adjusting to a changed world, a better world. I'm happy to kick it back to you, my friend, Steve.
Great, thanks, Bruce. I think you raised a really interesting question that we can take up in the group discussion as well, which is this issue of essentially when you have a recession that is targeted at certain industry sectors and the lowest socioeconomic group and often people of color across the state of California, how do you target resources to reach them? And I think that's a common issue across all of these programs that they struggle with. But for the final speaker, and then we'll open it to more general questions, I'm gonna hand it over to Kristin York. She is the Vice President of Business Innovation at the Sierra Business Council. So my colleague and partner in crime at times. She's also the director of the Northeastern California Sierra Small Business Development Center, as Bruce referenced, a technical assistance resource that has been buried, but feels like they're really doing the most important work in the state in the current crisis, amongst the most important work in the state. And also the kind of brains behind the development of a new program at Sierra Business Council called the Resilience Fund. So Kristin, over to you.
Great, thank you, Steve. You can go ahead to the next slide. And Bruce, I need a haircut too, but it's okay, we'll get there one day. So I'm gonna wrap it up here talking about a very granular, very place-based community impact fund called the Resilience Fund at Sierra. And this was developed out of our SBDC on March 13th when things started to shut down in our region and we were literally getting phone calls off the hook. We wanted to do something and we were approached by one of our supporters, if you will, somebody we collaborate with about who also wanted to do something. And it gave rise to the opportunity through Sierra Business Council to create the Sierra Resilience Fund. So it's a, as I said, place-based community impact fund. We definitely went to leverage the urgency of the situation to fill the immediate funding gap. We do have a small loan portfolio already, so we had our back office system set up. So we were able to mobilize pretty quickly. And we've always had a long-term goal of creating a sizable revolving loan fund. So the way we designed this was for the long term, which is why they're not grants, they are loans instead. So next slide, please. So the first thing we did was assemble our team to quickly build a website. You can check that out at resiliencefund.org. We were thrilled that Resilience Fund had not been taken. Build that website and then raise capital. We raise capital in two ways. We're a 501c3, so we either donation, which are tax deductible, or investors. And the investors are exempt from, this fund is exempt from SEC registration through the SEC Rule 506C, which allows investments from accredited investors. We lined that up with every applicant was eligible for coaching through our SBDC, and we did most of the outreach through our community. When we started this, we actually, some of the first interested players were the town of Truckee and our chamber, who helped promote this fund as well in the community. Next slide, please. So who benefits? You know, this was really based on the need we were seeing from our SBDC calls. The idea was this was about keeping viable businesses viable. So the very small. The maximum loan amount is $25,000 for this round of funding. The loans have a 5-year term at 2% with a 6-month deferral. And the decision was made to, you know, our rural communities, we rely so much on our historic downtowns. They're really a draw for tourism. So they're very important. I noticed that Bruce said moving away from bricks and mortar, but bricks and mortar in a community like the Tahoe Truckee area or Grass Valley, Nevada City, or South Lake Tahoe, which we're expanding to, so important because they really do support the economy. So focused on bricks and mortar, we excluded nonprofits and home-based businesses from this round because there were other methods of funding for them that were available. So Steve, next slide, please. So how it works is just a quick diagram. Is the business applies through a loan through our website. We vet them and we place, so we go through a triage situation. So sort of at the top end, a business may apply who has already received PPP or EIDL or in very good position to get that money. Maybe they have a line of credit in place that can take, or significant amount of savings, and we actually would kick them out of the program still and take them as an SBDC client because we feel like they have a great chance for survival, but we also tell them we keep their application on hand, and if they do need to come back, please do. Sort of at the bottom of the barrel are those businesses that were high risk. Maybe they were on the edge prior to the COVID crisis. So we assign them an SBDC counselor and really maybe look for another alternate funding or perhaps counsel them to liquidate. And this is an important thing too. And that sweet spot right in the middle is where the Resilience Fund is focused. We underwrite the loan in-house, we assign them, move on with the technical assistance, and then enter into their loan agreement. And once those funds are repaid, we get them right back into our fund so we can revolve them into the community. So one more slide, Steve. So as I mentioned, this Resilience Fund is particularly important for us for a number of reasons. One, it allowed us to address a huge need in the community and our businesses from the COVID crisis. But as these funds are paid back, really our long-term goal is to catalyze those local investment dollars to solve some big challenges that we see in our region. As Steve mentioned, Sierra Business Council is a triple bottom line organization. So we look not just at economic bottom line, but social equity and environmental responsibility. And our goal is to continue to build this fund into perpetuity so that we can address some of those very important community development issues like housing or natural resource protection. In our area, it's forest health and wildfire, etc. Potentially infrastructure. These could be funds that could be leveraged with federal dollars for infrastructure investment back in the community and supporting our health and social networks. So that is our Resilience Fund, a real quick overview, and happy to take any questions, or we can move on to general questions. I'm seeing one here.
Great. So I want to just remind people that if they have questions, please use the chat box to do those. I have a few that have built up here, but Kristin, do you see one individually that you wanted to answer?
No, I was looking back at one that you've already asked. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So I have a couple that have built up over the course of this. One of them is this really tough issue of the point that this recession targeted certain industry sectors and populations of the workforce, including low-wage workers and people of color, and how people are addressing targeting resources to those communities. So I'll open it up to all of the practitioners. What are your best practices around that? I think we saw Bruce's system firewalling portions of the funds, but I'm wondering how other people are addressing those issues.
Steve, I'll take a crack at that. You know, I have this hidden goal to democratize capital in some way. And what this, we also say around our office all the time, never waste a great disaster. So we had the opportunity to leverage some philanthropic capital to help most of these small businesses. They would not survive. They're sole proprietor, they're women owned, they're Latinx owned, and we're pretty thrilled to be redistributing that capital back into our workforce. So that's one way.
Great. Anyone else want to address that issue? Karin?
Sure. A couple ways. The Small Business Emergency Fund did not, was very clear in the way they talked about it that there was going to be, no looking at status of business owners, and they were very clear about really doing outreach. And then additionally, we did a lot of support for UndocuFund, and UndocuFund is it's a fund that is established to provide direct financial resources to the undocumented community. And what's hard to imagine, for an undocumented community member, they're not going to get access to any other resources, and they don't feel safe in trying to access resources. And so this fund was established so that, it's not directly to the businesses, but to the essential workers who are supporting those businesses, so that they can have access to funding to do whatever they need.
Yeah, that's a good point of creating a safe place for businesses to go, or for the workers to go to receive assistance, I think. So another interesting question that was brought up in Bruce's presentation, that that many of these funds are being stood up by CARES Act funding in different parts of the state of California. And I'm kind of curious, how do we use that CARES Act funding to leverage more permanent capital infrastructure to actually continue to live in the communities and create the pools of revolving capital and access to capital that we need? Anyone really thinking through that issue?
I'll hop in. It's Bruce. That is, I don't have an answer, but I think that is the question. In the case of Ventura County, and I'm no expert on the CARES Act funds, a good chunk of the money the county has received is intended to invest in strategies or recovery or reinvention that isn't just backfilling what is the damage or the cost the county is incurring. And so everybody's kind of scrambling around and trying to figure out what that is. And that contributed to this $20 million in rental assistance and business assistance. But it's an insane dialogue without having a discussion about, I get it, you're not going to probably take 10 million of that and put it into a loan fund that you can do on a revolving loan fund basis, because the feds want to see the money spent, which is by, I think, the end of November or December, which is part of the challenge. But again, I'm talking a lot without an answer, but if that is the huge question that our county government leaders are trying to figure out, what are the strategies that can be done that allow this money to actually be more leveraged and continue to pay and have longer term investment?
Anyone else want to jump in on that one?
I would say, yeah, I think that is an excellent question. That is something that from CAMEO we're really looking forward to explore more. I mean, definitely there is, we are seeing some of our members using some of that funding to leverage additional loan funds. So we do see them taking smaller amounts to just do loan loss reserves and some of the state loan guarantee fees and kind of the administrative costs to be able to leverage for as much as 4 times more for loan capital. So that is really exciting to start seeing like those partnerships with some of that CARES money funding. And we would definitely look to see if there is additional funding to be able to create some of these very innovative programs to be able to deploy more capital to the underserved small businesses that are really not receiving that much funding and are falling through the cracks.
And this is Isabel. One other thing to add too, just from the state's perspective, I mean, we're also trying to track to the state small business credit initiative, potential of revitalizing that program that had been launched previously during the recession, and whether or not the state could receive federal funds to deploy in its lending programs. The state's programs are flexible in terms of who can get it, nonprofits, undocumented. It's just, TIN is the focus. And so I do think whether it's CARES Act funding or something more flexible like the SSBCI or similar type of proposal that we're seeing at the federal level, that that those types of funding would be or funding streams would be really critical to being able to sustain us through recovery, because definitely more money is going to be needed. And yeah, CARES Act funding has to be spent by the end of the year. The state disaster program is disaster assistance funding. And so, I do think that the more flexibility we can have in those programs, the better.
Yeah, I think the other interesting issue with that is that we know that with the confluence of 2 to 3 major kind of events or threads in our society today, an increased call for equity and justice, the impact of COVID-19 and the associated recession, that the next economy is going to look very different than the past economy. So how do we create the resources and the strategy for the pivot is a really big deal. How do we shorten the time period of the recessionary period and the pain involved in that in order to really give people a platform for kind of moving into the future? And I think that's something that I hear everyone around the state struggling with, So one other, a couple of other questions here. One question that came in earlier, I want everyone to just really quickly weigh in on is, we've gone all virtual on just about everything. And we had a question about whether or not people see that as changing essentially how people are doing technical assistance. Is it improving engagement? Is it improving interest in technical assistance programs and access to capital? And can we even separate that out from the emergency at this point? Is it basically teaching us a new mode for work? And do we see that catching on?
We see it extensively in our data from our centers that, obviously you're right. Like, it's hard to separate what was just increased disaster demand, but we've heard it in comments and, individual, more anecdotal information that people find it more easier to plug in because it's on demand, which is what, consumers want at this point across every type of service or product. But it's that on demand capability is what I think is getting better reach into those underserved communities.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've heard a lot from our members. People, it was obviously a big, like a reality check when all of this happened. But once everybody kind of move online. And I keep saying this, personally, like from CAMEO last year, we were 3 months displaced for a small fire in our building, and we had to move everything online. So we have the pre-work of having everything online. So for this, we just took the computers and we were ready to work the next day from home. But that transition, it was the pain period really for a lot of organizations and small businesses. And we heard a lot about underserved communities having a challenge to connect with the technology tools that we were trying to deploy. And that actually was a process that happened at the beginning of this crisis. Now people seems to be more open to use these tools, and definitely we are hearing a lot of like, we probably will continue this because we're able to reach more organizations. I do not think, or more businesses, I do not think that this is going to be 100%. People still needs like that networking, that interaction, that sometimes there is a lot of face-to-face needed. But I think it's going to diminish substantially, and a lot of the like the events and the trainings and consulting, it might be continued to do like this. I do feel like even for lending, it's just a must right now to be able to provide that lending process online to streamline their processes. It's going to continue in that trend, and it was happening before. It's just going to continue happening.
Okay, one last question, and then I want to wrap it up. But I do want to note that Craig Sharton saved some or shared some information in the chat box about business stabilization coaches available for small and medium-sized manufacturers and makers. So I would encourage people to take a look at that and take advantage of the resource that he's sharing with us. Thank you for that, Craig. Last question from Claire Whitmer. Is there any pattern that you've observed as to which economic sectors or business types are the most resilient? And we've talked a lot about the use of virtual sales and marketing channels to support revenue for impacted businesses. But then how do we address the digital divide for so many of the most needed businesses and sectors? And that's both an urban and a rural problem across the state. So are there most resilient sectors, and how do we close the digital divide?
I'll hop in on that real quickly. It's Bruce. One of the things I think this has taught us is it's not so much about sectors. Now, we have learned that certain sectors got hammered worse than others. If you were in hospitality and food and accommodation and general services. But on the positive side, the one thing that we know in a sort of post-Amazon world, and as we go more remote and we're using technology, is that businesses that use their innovative strategies to continue or to reinvent themselves in a way that recaptures or captures the personal experience. Consumers still want to know where their products come from, who's providing their services. They want a relationship. And we've lost a lot of that, and we've sort of learned to redo it here in a Zoom world. But if you're using technology and using social media and using communication strategies effectively to recreate or reestablish that personal touch, that's a big, big high reach, but I think that the answer is across just about all sectors. Consumers want to know where their stuff came from. Thanks.
I would agree completely that the resilience is truly in their preparedness, their, you know, what they did in terms of building strategies beforehand, as well as their willingness to change and adapt. And I think across really some highly impacted industries in terms of closures and you know, very difficult implementation, you know, needs from the guidelines perspective. You've still seen some businesses have some successful models, and those are the ones who had planned, were willing to adapt, and also have tried to figure out how to master communication in this virtual world, because it's a whole new world, and those who can try to figure out how to market electronically are the ones who are going to succeed and be most resilient.
Great, thanks, Isabel. So I want to honor our time by closing on time. So first, I want to say thank you so much to California Forward for making this opportunity and this discussion, the wide range of discussions today available. This is all valuable information that I think will get aggregated into the California Economic Summit in Monterey in December. For those of you who are not planning on it to attend, It would be a great event for us to begin pivoting the state of California. I also want to thank the staff at California Forward who helped assist today, including Lauren Jaglinski and Deb Collars and everyone who set up the backbone and the technology and the questions and everything else. Bring your attention to the point that contact information for everyone is on the screen now, and I'm sure these recordings will be available shortly on the California Forward website. And then I want to close by particularly thanking Isabel. And I think I have to say that every day when I see the work we are doing, not just to address the COVID crisis and the public health crisis, but also to think strategically about where this state is going, I'm thankful that I'm a Californian. And it feels really good to be able to say that. And I think a lot of that is because we have visionary and dedicated leadership. And that's what we really need to drive the state forward, to overcome its challenges and to make that pivot where we can have more opportunity for everyone in a future California. So thank you all, and thanks to California Forward, and have a great day. Thanks a lot. Bye.